Hello, and thank you very much for joining us in this session. BESS is a specialized battery service provider. We offer solutions to any challenges encountered in any BESS project. We have a combined experience over 20 gigawatt hours worth of projects. We have been involved in the majority of the large transmission and DSO connected battery projects in the UK, currently expanding into the emerging markets in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. I am Andres Blanco, Managing Director and founder of BESS. I have been working with batteries in the last 10 years or so, and I have overall 15 years of experience in the renewable energy business. Today, I want to give you an overview of the critical technical and techno-commercial points for you to consider in your battery contracts. Starting on the technical side, we always start with the technical specifications. We put a lot of emphasis in the technical specifications of our projects. You may call them employer's requirement, minimum functional technical specification, whatever the name is. The important bet here is that it has to be concise, very detailed on the requirements for your batteries, for your civils, for your PCS, for all of the project. It needs to be concise because we have been in many projects that they are very long employees requirement, but at the end of the day, it doesn't say much. The reason being what we put a lot of emphasis on the technical specification is mainly 2 points. One, you will have a true visibility of the cost of your project. Why? Because you're going to remove the need of having multiple VOs through construction or design from your contractor because everything is well detailed and agreed in your contract. And the other second point is that when things turn sour, you have protection from your technical specifications. The other critical point, the division of responsibility. Again, we spend a lot of time in agreeing this with the different contractors. What is important here is to define the interfaces of scope and responsibility between the multiple parties. And in our experience, we have noted that these interfaces are going to be your weakest point on the project. And this is very important when you have multiple contracting parties in your project. The factory acceptance test, we also emphasize and spend good time in negotiating the key parameters with the suppliers. We have 3 points that we normally like to get well detailed in our technical specifications. First of all, is to agree what are going to be the tests that we're going to do in your inspection test protocol. Second of all, to have right to witness the FAT. You will be surprised to hear that there are still many suppliers that don't allow third parties to be in their factories because of data and IP protection. And the third and most important for me is having access to data. In this particular example that I'm showing you here, we were able to spot through analyzing the data in our witnessing of the FATs that the stream voltages of different containers in this project were not balanced. What this means is that if we would have spotted this in an early stage or rectified this project would have suffered accelerated degradation and underperformance. We also work with companies like Acure, where we offer more enhanced data evaluation, predictive analytics, again, by having the right access to data. The detailed commissioning strategy is another important factor to agree with all of your contractors. Started with the delivery acceptance test. In here, we normally carry the visual inspections and whatnot. What we want to make sure here is that the equipments are okay for the titles of ownership to be passed to the employer. We have a defined mechanical and cold commissioning strategy. And in here, what we want to make sure is that the equipment is ready for energization. Also, depending on how compressed the program is, your schedule of work, we also trying to see whether if we can speed up or decompress the program by allowing partial energization or full energization of the equipment by using generators. We move to having the project energized and then being able to do the hot commissioning. Important in large BESS projects, that is very likely that you're going to have your energization and hot commissioning tests in blocks, and all of these sequences have to be agreed, with the different contractors, and again, more importantly, in your program. And finally, moving to the grid test, this is going to be a coordination depending on who is taking the lead on your grid test, whether if they are TSO, DSO, and they have to be compliant with the grid code. We need It's always recommendable to have a lead party. It could be either the PCS provider or the best suppliers or your HBBOB. Important here is to clarify and to make you aware that depending in the country you are, for example, in the UK, you may require an independent technical expert to certify and verify that the project is compliant with the different ancillary or grid services. So we have to carry several tests, and they have to validate this. In our projects, we like and we normally recommend to have this scope agreed in an early stage of the project and not waiting to the end, because not naturally at the end, when you're moving to energization, there is not much time or flexibility to incorporate the needs of the IT. Moving to the detailed test on and after completion. Very important, and you will be surprised again to hear that we have been involved in projects that they have 350 pages or more employers requirement, and not even a single page or section names or detail what is required for the contractors to achieve taking over certificate or TOC. In our projects, we like to have an independent technical schedule where we detailed precisely all of the parameters and all of the tests that the contractor has to achieve before passing or achieving the TOC. We define what is the accept and fail criteria, the pass and fail criteria, but more importantly, we introduce the rejection criteria. The rejection criteria is a very contentious point because no subcontractor like to have any rejection clause, but we definitely recommend it because we truly believe that it's always good to have an exit point when things turn sour or they don't go to plan in your project. Cybersecurity and in-country restrictions is becoming a major challenge in our projects, particularly since the introduction of the NIS2, depending if your project is subject to the IEC 62443 certification, it may restrict security or enhance the security and firewall configuration of your project. What this means is that your supplier or battery supplier may not be allowed to access your batteries remotely, and then they're not going to have access to data for evaluating the performance and whatnot. So the consequences are that in very small funds, they will put this responsibility to the employer in the warranty agreements. Obviously, if you were to fail to provide this data, then they could either terminate the contract, your warranty contract, or claim that they're not liable for underperformance LDs. Naturally, we push back on these points under the argument that if we are paying for a long-term service agreement, it's your responsibility to have the relevant party to access the data or either on-site or evaluate the data on-site or provide that data to the supplier. Moving to the techno-commercial elements, we have the Incoterms. Very important since the introduction of the US tariff, the majority of the suppliers moved to free on board or FOB. We normally don't recommend FOB unless you have experience transporting batteries. We would rather prefer having the delivery duty paid by the supplier, or if the cost is not permissive, delivery at place at least. The reason being is because batteries are very sensible to temperature, humidity, and vibration. And the riskiest point in our experience for batteries being damaged is during transportation. And the key risk of these damages is that they're normally hidden, and you're not going to be able to spot this unless that you have your delivery acceptance test or enough data to evaluate this. That's why in our project we clearly define this delivery acceptance test in which we specify and agree with the contractor or the supplier for them to provide data for the temperature, humidity, and vibration at all time during transportation. Then when we do the test in Blambos, we do the thorough vision inspection, but more importantly, do an evaluation of the data to make sure that the results are within the thresholds of from following the OEM recommendations. Also, we'd like to have or to introduce here the rejection criteria in case any of these deliveries exceeded the recommended values. Payment terms, we normally like to negotiate a more balanced cost neutral approach, which 50% of the contract price is paid throughout the contract being signed and the batteries being accepted on site, and the remaining 50% from when the batteries are being accepted on site to achieving taking over certificate. Delayed LDs against milestone. This is another recommendation that we like to give to our clients and agree in our projects. We have experienced better management of the program from the contractors when we have delays LDs associated with key milestone of the project rather than leaving it to the final taking over certificate delays LDs. What we normally do when we agree this principle is that we have an aggregated liability cap that takes or cover all of the sub delays LD and the final delay LD at TOC. Very important, your correction factors. This is a very gray area at the moment. Not many suppliers like to disclose this in the contract. What a part of one in our experience. What we like to have here is mechanism that we can correct the state of health curve agreed in the contract. For example, there might be an event that your have a substantial delay in your project. It could be because the grid was not ready, whatever the reason is, there was a prolonged delay which had an impact on the self degradation of the battery. What this means is that when you do your energy capacity test, you're not going to be able to achieve the agreed energy capacity at year zero because the impact that the equipment suffered through this prolonged delay. So the result is that when you do your energy capacity test, yes, you not achieve the energy agreed, then your curve, the SOH curve agreed in the contract is not going to be fit for purpose because you didn't start on the value that you thought you were going to start. If you don't have a mechanism, you're not going to be able to correct the curve. Then you're not going to have any protection during the lifetime of the long-term service agreement. That's why we like to have a correction factor to accommodate for any delays impacting the calendar aging. Similarly, when we move to the operational side, you're going to be doing your yearly performance test, and these yearly performance tests are dependent on temperatures. Equally, your agree SOH curve, the supplier agree on a temperature for them, not only the utilization, the number of cycles, but also a temperature for them to be able to agree on this curve. The temperatures that they normally use is the standard test condition, your 25 degrees. What happens is that sometimes depending on the region that you are on, depending when you energize first your project, it might well be that when you do the test, ambient temperatures are above the 25 degrees. So obviously the results of the test are going to be showing that the project is underperforming. But there is a loophole there that your supplier may claim that they're not subject to liabilities or underperforming performance LDs because the temperatures are not following the STC temperatures. So to remove this ambiguity, we prefer having the mechanism to correct the test by introducing a value and dependence or a correction factor based on temperature. Equally, we like to have full flexibility in our warranties based on utilization and energy throughput, so you can have full utilization of the system. So what we normally negotiate is if in a particular year you didn't utilize your full allowance of the energy throughput, that a proportion of this value can be passed to the following year. Similarly, if you were to use or exceed your allowance that you can borrow, obviously up to a point, a proportion from your following year. By doing this, obviously you're gonna have full flexibility through your lifetime of the project. Performance and availability LD caps. This is another contention point that we have managed to agree in few number of projects, but it's not very industry standard to aggregate the LD caps or liability caps of your project based or linked to the supply agreement contract price throughout the full duration of the long-term service agreement. You will see a big pushback from the suppliers to agreeing to this point. Again, we have managed to agree on this into a couple of projects. I believe that the industry is going to move on to this trend. But if you're not able to agree on this principle, we strongly recommend that at least your 2 years defect notification period LD cap are linked to the supply agreement contract price. Why? Because the long-term service agreement price is about 1 to 1.5% of the supply agreement contract price. What it means is that you're not going to have enough budget in your caps. And also, you want to remove the opportunity for the supplier to be banking on the LDs, on the LTSAs, LD caps. LTSAs versus warranties. We like to have a clause in our technical specifications or warranty agreements that allow the employers to terminate the LTSA if they require. It could be that you are an experienced employer with battery projects, that you have a dedicated on-and-M team that can keep up with the performance guarantees and availability, which at that time you may not see value from the LTSA. Or it could be that you want to reduce your OPEX, because obviously the LTSA is one of the biggest elements in terms of volume that are quite costly. What we want to do is that if we trigger this clause, is that we can keep the equipment defect warranties and that we can also extend it if it's required. But then again, this has to be agreed on your contract because the majority of the suppliers warranties or service agreements don't allow you to do so by default. ESG policies is very important, particularly if your company has ESG policies within the organization. We normally focus on our technical specifications to detail on the reporting template and to have full visibility of the supply chain from the supplier. What's important here is to clearly state that if it's required by the employer, that you have the right to do auditing at any supplier within this supply chain. Your BESS warranties and your operator, whether if you call it optimizer, route to market, whatever the name is, in their operators agreement, your battery warranties have to be aligned. In other words, whatever the utilization is being agreed with the optimizer or route to market provider has to be back to back with the thresholds that you have agreed on your battery warranties. I don't want to say that all of the optimizers are under the same attitude, but we have experienced that some of them, to be honest, they don't care what are the warranties and what not. They will utilize the max possible allowed under the contract. So if you are not careful on this point, what could happen is that your battery is going to be knackered on the first year. And second of all, you don't want to be voiding any warranties that you have with the best supplier. So to avoid this gap, what we recommend is that your route to market agreement, optimizer agreement, has to be back to back with your battery warranties. So wrapping up this, this is what we do in Blind Boys. This is part of one of our services, and it could be that we get involved in an early stage of the project, and we manage and lead all of the tender and tendering evaluation, as well as the contract negotiations. We manage the technical specifications and all of this as part of your team, or we can get involved in the contract negotiations in an earlier stage, in a later stage. What we normally do when we get involved in a later stage is to apply our own methodologies to as analyze what are the current risks of your project. We apply all of the points I discussed before to give a risk score to our clients so they can have some visibility on the areas that they are needing more elaboration or support. When we then get involved and apply all our negotiation skills and strategies, in this particular example, we were able to manage and reduce this risk score. What we do from with the residual risk is that we work with the procurement team and the delivery team to make them aware, particularly the delivery team, of what are the risks present in the contract, so they are prepared and they can better manage this risk throughout the delivery of the project. Because you're gonna be surprised how many projects we have been involved that the delivery team actually is just left with a very messy contract, which is almost in some cases impossible to build. So that's what we do with applying our strategy. It's not only just for managing the contract negotiations and whatnot, but it's also to have an understanding what are the risk, the residual risk associated with the contract, so your delivery team can manage them properly. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. I will be more than happy to help you or anyone from the Blind Boss team. Thank you very much.